Picture a canal in the high desert of California, wide as a highway, running straight for 80 miles. The water inside it is enough to keep Los Angeles, San Diego, Phoenix, and Las Vegas alive for a year. And yet, it belongs to a valley with under 200,000 people. That single valley holds a legal claim to more Colorado River water than the entire state of Arizona. More than Nevada and Las Vegas combined. More than the drinking supply of 40 million Americans who never once got to vote on how it gets split. How did that happen? How did a handful of farm families, many growing alfalfa to feed cattle in Saudi Arabia and China, end up with a stronger legal grip on the most fought-over river in North America than the cities where most Westerners actually live? That is the story. It isn't a conspiracy either. It's worse. It is completely legal, written down in black ink, and nobody in power wants to be the person who touches it. Let me take you back. The Colorado River isn't actually that big. That trips a lot of people up. The Mississippi carries roughly 15 times more water. The Colorado is a modest, muddy, hard-working little river that drains snow off the Rockies and drags it 1,400 miles across dry land before it used to reach the sea in Mexico. I say used to because it hasn't reliably touched the ocean in decades. It gets completely used up. Every drop is spoken for, sometimes even more than every drop. Here is the flaw at the center of the whole thing. In 1922, 7 states sat down in a lodge outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, and carved up the river. They called it the Colorado River Compact. They needed a number for their math, so they measured the river's flow during one of the wettest stretches in recorded history. They assumed the Colorado carried about 17.5 million acre-feet a year and handed out rights to roughly 16.5 million of it. Very generous. The problem is that the real long-term average is closer to 13 or 14 million acre-feet, and during current droughts, it drops toward 12 or 11 million. They literally promised out more water than exists. The entire legal setup of the American Southwest rests on a massive bookkeeping error that nobody has had the guts to fix. Now, the compact split water between states, but it didn't decide who inside those states got first dibs. For that, you have to look at the oldest rule in Western water law, prior appropriation. To put it simply, it means first in line, first in right. Whoever put the water to use earliest holds the senior claim. It doesn't matter if you're a city of 1 million people. If your water right was filed in 1965 and a farmer filed theirs in 1901, that farmer drinks first. In a shortage, the newcomers get cut to zero while the old claims stay full. Seniority is everything, and out here, seniority is measured in decades of dust. So you can see the trap. The cities came late. Phoenix was a quiet town of 5,000 people in 1900. Las Vegas barely existed. Los Angeles was growing, sure, but the massive desert cities we know today all grew up much later in the 20th century. They're all at the back of the line. The farmers got there first, especially in one specific spot, the Imperial Valley. Tucked into the southeast corner of California, right on the Mexican border, it sits below sea level and gets hot enough in July to cook an egg on a truck hood. 120 years ago, it was pure Sonoran desert with creosote, sand, and nothing else. Then a private company cut a channel from the Colorado River in 1901. The water came in, and the desert turned green almost overnight. The engineering was pretty reckless. In 1905, the river broke through the works and poured into a dry basin for nearly 2 years, accidentally creating the Salton Sea. But the farmers stayed, and they filed their water claims early, right at the start of the century. Their rights are about as senior as it gets. Today, the Imperial Irrigation District holds a right to roughly 1 million acre-feet of Colorado River water every single year. Let that number sink in. California's total allocation from the river is 4.4 million acre-feet. One rural irrigation district in one desert county controls most of the biggest state's entire share. That water flows through the All-American Canal, that highway-wide channel I mentioned, and soaks into fields growing alfalfa, Bermuda grass, lettuce, and winter vegetables that fill grocery stores every January. Roughly 500 farming operations run that valley. You're looking at a few hundred families and businesses at the center of it. Their combined water right is larger than Arizona's entire share, and bigger than Nevada's slice by a mile. When official reports talk about 40 million people depending on the Colorado, including Denver, Salt Lake, Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Southern California. Those 40 million sit behind the farmers of Imperial County during a shortage. That isn't an exaggeration. That is the actual priority order. This is where the situation gets absurd. A massive portion of that water goes toward growing alfalfa. Alfalfa is a thirsty crop used for cattle feed, and a lot of it isn't even for American cows. Saudi Arabia banned its own farmers from pumping groundwater dry to grow alfalfa after they drained their aquifers. So, Saudi companies came to the American Southwest, leased land, and started growing hay here using our water before shipping the bales across the ocean. Dairy operations tied to China do the same thing. We are essentially exporting the Colorado River as dried grass during the worst drought the region has seen in 1,200 years. 1,200 years isn't dramatic spin. Scientists reconstructed the river's flow using tree rings, and the stretch from 2000 onward is the driest multi-decade period in that entire record. Not just since we started keeping official records, but since long before the modern era. Meanwhile, human demand hasn't dropped to match it. You can actually see the consequences piling up behind two massive concrete walls, Lake Powell behind Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Mead behind Hoover Dam. They were built to act as the West Bank account, saving water during wet years to carry the region through dry ones. In 2000, they were nearly full. Today, Lake Powell sits around 26% capacity. Projections show the reservoir could hit dead power pool level, meaning Glen Canyon Dam's turbines can no longer spin to create electricity. That could happen very soon, which would be a first in the 60-plus years since it started filling. There's a scary detail here. The dam stops generating power at 3,490 feet, but water can still pass through until it drops another 120 feet to complete dead pool. So the region loses its power grid support long before it completely loses the water. So what happens if the reservoirs keep dropping? Who actually gets cut? Under the letter of the law, the cities do. First, the newest claims in fast-growing metros like Phoenix and Tucson rely on the Central Arizona Project Canal, which holds a very junior right. Legally, Arizona's cities can get squeezed down to zero before a single senior farm in the Imperial Valley loses a single drop. If strict priority order was ever enforced in a severe drought, water would keep flowing to alfalfa fields, feeding foreign livestock, while millions of residents in Phoenix turn on their taps and get nothing. Nobody wants to manage a modern country like that, and everyone involved knows it. That is why, for years now, the whole system has been sustained by side deals and cash payouts instead of strictly enforcing the law. If you enforced prior appropriation to the letter, you'd trigger a legal war in the courts that could last a generation and paralyze the West. So instead, governments pay the senior water holders to voluntarily leave water in the reservoirs. We are talking billions of dollars. Federal drought response funds pay irrigation districts and tribes to fallow fields and cut back on usage. In simple terms, we're renting back our own river from the people who got there first. The Imperial Irrigation District has signed conservation deals worth hundreds of millions to reduce its take, paying farmers to leave fields dry for a season. To be fair, a lot of these farmers didn't create the problem. They inherited rights that are over a century old. They grow food that supplies the nation. And they've watched sprawling cities pop up around them only to point fingers at their crops. When a local rancher points out that desert cities shouldn't lecture farmers about waste while building massive decorative fountains in Las Vegas, he has a point. Still, throwing money at the problem doesn't fix the underlying issue. Paying people not to use water only works while there's money to spend and extra slack in the system. The drought is permanent. The original contract was flawed, and paying for conservation relies on the hope that wet years will come back to refill the reservoirs. In 2023, heavy snowpack in the Rockies gave the region a brief breather, and lake levels ticked up. Everyone exhaled. But a single dry year afterward erased most of those gains. The temporary relief was just a mirage, and the long-term trend still points down. When you look at what this means on the ground, the reality is stark. Drive up to Lake Mead, and you'll see a stark white bathtub ring on the canyon walls, marking where the water level used to sit over 150 feet higher. As the water dropped, it exposed sunken boats and long-lost remains from decades ago. Further out, smaller reservoirs are drying up around towns that rely on them. You see boat docks stranded on dry land, dozens of feet above the remaining water, and restaurants that once overlooked lakes now staring out over cracked dirt. Downstream in farm country, the squeeze is just as real. Growers in New Mexico's Hatch Valley have had their water rationed down to just a few inches for an entire season. Some farmers are quietly considering retiring their land permanently so their water can be transferred elsewhere. Why can't leaders just rewrite the compact and split the water fairly between cities and farms? There are two big reasons. First, the legal side is locked down tight. Those senior water rights are treated as private property under the law. You can't take private property in America without compensation because of Fifth Amendment protections. Stripping the Imperial Valley of its senior share would lead to massive compensation claims costing billions in years of court battles. The farmers hold immense legal leverage, and they know it. Second, the politics are brutal. The river spans 7 states, 2 countries, and 30 federally recognized tribes whose claims were ignored for a century and are only now being recognized. Getting everyone to agree on a new split is almost impossible. Upper basin states like Colorado and Utah are constantly at odds with lower basin states like California, Arizona, and Nevada. With each side arguing the other hasn't cut back enough. The core issue is that the lower basin historically used more than its strict technical share back when extra water was flowing. Now there is no extra water. Someone has to take permanent unpaid cuts, and nobody wants to yield first. The federal government can step in and force cuts using its authority over the dams. But officials are terrified of the massive lawsuits that would instantly follow if they override senior rights. So we end up in a strange standoff. Everyone knows the system is broken. Anyone can go online and watch the reservoir levels fall in real time. Yet the basic structure keeping a few hundred farm families ahead of 40 million people remains untouched. Because changing it means someone loses, and out here, losing water means losing your livelihood. I keep thinking about the alfalfa. It's the clearest sign of how backward the system is. Hay crops soak up roughly a third of the entire Colorado River's flow. A thirsty, low-value crop grown in the hottest desert in the country takes more water than every city combined, with a chunk of it shipped overseas. If you tried to design a system to waste water during a massive drought, you couldn't do much worse than this. Yet the farmers aren't doing this out of malice. The rules actively encourage it. Water law historically uses a use it or lose it principle. If a farmer leaves water in the river, to be responsible. They risk losing that portion of their legal claim later because they proved they didn't need it. For 100 years, the smartest financial move was to use every drop, plant thirsty crops, and guard your seniority. The law rewarded the exact behavior that is now causing problems. It isn't a moral failure, it's a design flaw. There are small signs of progress. Some water districts now allow farmers to get paid for conserving without risking their long-term legal rights. Cities like Las Vegas have aggressively removed decorative grass lawns and now recycle almost all indoor water, cutting their total river usage even as their population grew. Arizona has been storing excess water underground in aquifers, and several tribes are finally getting their rights recognized and leasing water back into the system. These steps help, but they are small patches on a huge structural problem rooted in 1922 arithmetic. The number that sticks with me is 40 million. That's how many people depend on the Colorado River across the Southwest. About 1 in 8 Americans. It waters millions of acres of farmland that supply winter produce, and it generates power for millions of homes. Yet the underlying legal framework says that if water runs short, the cities, homes, and drinking taps are at the back of the line. At the front of the line sits a desert valley below sea level, growing hay in extreme heat, with part of the harvest bound for cattle on the other side of the world. That isn't a mistake in the system. That is the system operating exactly as it was written over a century ago, built for a world that no longer exists. The river keeps shrinking, but the old legal lines remain. When those two realities finally clash, when the reservoirs hit bottom and someone has to enforce who gets water first, we'll see if century-old paperwork holds up against 40 million people needing water. The paper will probably win for a while, right up until it can't. And when that happens, the fight for what's left won't be settled with handshakes. It will happen in courtrooms and on the ground at the end of empty canals.